Hi there, I'm Patsy Thompson and I have just fallen in love with machine embroidered applique. I was really frightened to try split designs or designs that were so large they had to be done in more than one hooping because I was sure that I'd screw up the placement and ruin my block. But what I've found is that it's actually very easy to do split designs, so I want to show you some tricks I've learned along the way. Today I'm going to show you how to do a basic split design. We'll be working on a quilt block that will have only one split, and you'll see that it will fit together really easily. For our demo today, I'm going to make one of these 10 1/4 inch wreaths on a 14-inch fabric block. Aren't they just lovely? The plume shapes were cut using the Applique Cuts Plume Family die, and you can see that the embroidery really just turns this into a very sophisticated looking wreath. Let's get started. I've hooped a piece of medium weight cutaway stabilizer, and the first thing I do is to load that onto my embroidery machine without any fabric. I'm using the jumbo hoop on the Bernina 830 machine, but know that you do not need a hoop this large to stitch this particular design. Now I'm starting with the left side of the wreath, and the machine will stitch 3 crosshairs. These 3 crosshairs are the registration points that will guide me in floating my fabric block in just the right way to have my design centered on the block. Now I've already stabilized my fabric block by fusing interfacing to the back side, and let me show you how I'm going to mark it. You can see that I've drawn 2 lines, each perpendicular to each other, at the midpoint of all 4 sides of this block. I used a soap sliver to mark these, and they will help me line up my block with the registration crosshairs that are on the stabilizer. Notice I've positioned my hoop on my table so that one side is just barely overhanging the edge, as this will enable me to place pins through it. I place a pin through the dead center of my block, and I place that same pin through the exact center of the middle crosshair on my stabilizer. Notice that I pushed it all the way down until the pin head is flat against my hoop. Next, coming up from beneath the stabilizer, I place a pin through the side crosshair, and I bring that pin up through my fabric block so that it pierces my soap line. As I do this, I make sure my fabric will lie flat and my pin will stand straight up. This is important because if that pin needs to slant, it means my placement isn't quite right. I do the same thing with the pin on the other side. When I'm finished, all 3 pins stand straight and my fabric lays flat. Next, I touch a few light swipes of lapel stick to the side of the stabilizer we'll be embroidering. Lapel stick is a very light fabric glue, and I'm placing such a small amount that no one will ever know it's there, and it won't leave any hardness or stiffness. Leaving my 3 original pins in place, I next place a pin away from the center's block that will hold my block in place. I do the same thing on each side, and again, notice that I'm placing these pins as far as possible from the center of the block, and I'm doing this because I don't want to risk the embroidery machine needle coming anywhere near one of my pins. I remove those 3 original holding pins, and I'm ready to begin embroidering. The machine begins by stitching 3 registration crosshairs across the very center of the wreath. It also stitches a basting line around the perimeter of the block and then stitches the placement outline for all the plumes. Once stitched, the hoop is removed from the machine so we can fuse the applique shapes. Here you see 3 crosshairs. These are what will enable us to align the second half of the wreath perfectly when we go to stitch the second side. We also have a basting line that's easily removed after the stitching is complete, and you can see that we now have placement outlines for each individual plume. After removing the paper backing from our applique pieces, I place each applique shape into its spot, taking care to fuse it exactly within the placement outline. I'm using a Clover mini iron to do this because it allows me to fuse with complete precision. Once I've filled each placement outline with an applique plume shape, the real fun begins. The machine works from one plume to the next, first stitching a tack down stitch and then stitching a decorative edge finishing design around each and every plume. Now if you wanted a very basic wreath like this one without the fancy internal teardrops, you'd move to the second side of the wreath once this first stitching sequence was done. But I'm going for the whole enchilada here, so once the machine has finished that first stitching sequence, we swap to a different thread color and the machine next stitches out the internal teardrop design inside each plume. Once that sequence is complete, we swap threads one last time and the machine stitches that beautiful candle wicking border stitch. Once the last stitching sequence is complete, we remove the hoop from the machine, remove our 3 pins, unhoop the whole project, and marvel at how beautifully and easily this wreath is evolving. Do you see these 3 registration crosshairs? We need them to ensure correct alignment when we go to do the second wreath half, so we don't want to do anything to mess with them. Before we rehoop though, we're going to remove just a bit of stabilizer. Now I use Child's blunt tip scissors on my cutaway stabilizer and it works great. I carefully cut the stabilizer that's just outside the stitching in the center area because this is the area where our 2 wreath halves will join. Notice that I'm not even opening and closing my scissor handles, but I'm gently advancing the barely open scissors along a path just outside the stitching. This process is very fast. If I have time, I'll also remove my basting stitches and the stabilizer on the outside of the wreath, but when you're in a hurry, all that needs to be removed at this point is the stabilizer that runs across the center of the block. Most importantly though, notice that as I work, I make sure that I do not accidentally remove those 3 crosshairs because we really need them in the next step. I've loaded the file for the right side of the wreath, and the first thing the machine did was to stitch those 3 crosshairs onto my stabilizer again. I place a pin through the center crosshair of my block and pierce the center crosshair of the stabilizer below. Working from below, I then place a pin through my side crosshair and make certain that it pierces the side crosshair on my hooped block. Again, you'll want to make sure you are piercing the exact center of each crosshair, as this is how you're assured of getting perfect alignment. Once all 3 crosshairs have pins that can stand straight and my fabric lies flat, I take a few light swipes with my lapel stick and then add my 3 pins that will be far enough away from the machine's needle that I know I'm safe. I remove my 3 original placement pins and return my hoop to the machine. The machine stitches the basting outline, and notice that the basting lines do not meet one another. They're not supposed to here, so don't let that freak you out. Once the basting is done, the machine stitches the placement outlines for the second side of applique shapes, so we can fuse them in place just like before. Once the plumes are fused in place, the machine stitches the same 3 stitching sequences as before. When the stitching is done and all of the excess stabilizer has been removed, you can see that you've got a lovely wreath block that's been aligned to perfection. This is the exact same process you'd follow if you were stitching the larger 12-inch wreath, and you'll get flawless alignment every time. And there you have it, how to stitch a really simple split machine embroidered applique design using your embroidery machine. Could it be any easier? Now, if you'd like to try stitching out this specific applique design, visit our website at PatsyThompsonDesigns.com. If you've got some questions about this, can't quite figure out how to do it yet, feel free to shoot me an email at Patsy@PatsyThompsonDesigns.com, but please don't post a question to this YouTube video because I really can't answer you right here. Thanks a lot and keep quilting.